Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today I decided that in honor of Friday the 13th, I would rank all of the main films in the Friday the 13th franchise. So that is from the original film all the way up until Jason X. I am not going to do Freddy vs. Jason, and I am not going to do the Friday the 13th remake. And honestly, this is my favorite slasher series out of all of them. Out of Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, all those. I love Friday the 13th. I love Jason Voorhees. I love the aesthetic. I like all the creativeness with the kills, the special effects by Tom Savini in the early ones, and going forward and stuff like that. It's my favorite slasher series, and it felt very fitting to do this on Friday the 13th. So, without any kind of delay, let's go right into it. So number 10 is Friday the 13th Part 9, Jason Goes to Hell. And also, sorry, keep in mind that I'm going to be counting down from 10 to 1, with 1 being my favorite. So the first, number 10 is Friday the 13th Part 9, Jason Goes to Hell. And the reason why this is number 10 is because this is barely a Friday the 13th movie. And when I say barely, I mean, like, you see Jason at the very beginning and the very end of the film, and a couple little snippets here and there. Because the idea of the film is supposed to be that Jason Voorhees is some kind of immortal being, and they drop hints that he's like a deadite from the Necronomicon, because we see the Necronomicon in this movie in the Voorhees house, and stuff like that. So the idea is like he like transfers bodies and he can possess people and stuff like that. And this is when Sean Cunningham, who was the director of the original film, came back to do this movie, and I believe he was. I don't think he directed it, but he was an executive producer. The only things that this movie really gets points for is obviously Kane Hodder is still playing Jason in this, as he did continuing on from Part 7 or 7 and 8, and so I got to give it points for that. I don't really mind Jason's design in this, even though it's kind of weird looking. He has like this almost metal type of mask that's like grafted to his face, as opposed to the traditional like just hockey mask overlay or something like that. So it has a few things working for it, but ultimately the plot is convoluted. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't really feel like a Friday the 13th film, because again, it's really not Jason running around for most of the movie. He's possessing like a lot of these random people, and they're the ones doing the killing. So again, it doesn't really feel right. And also, they blow him up at the very beginning of the movie with a rocket launcher, so that's kind of a new thing. But yeah, this has to be number 9 because it is literally the least Friday the 13th out of all the Friday the 13th films. But that's my number 10. Number 9, Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning. Now, this was from 1985, and this film, unfortunately, tried to play with the audience because supposedly Jason was killed off at the end of Part 4, and this was his return. This is also the follow-up to Part 4, where we see Corey Feldman's character Tommy coming back, and he's supposed to be this mentally scarred person. He's been going out of like mental health homes and stuff for most of his youth, and now he's cusping on an adult. I think he's supposed to be 18 or 19 in the actual film, even though the actor looks much older. But he goes to this mental health place, this like outside retreat where a bunch of these troubled kids are, and Jason shows up and starts killing people. But we find out at the end that it was really somebody else in the suit. But for whatever reason, during the movie, he appears to have superhuman strength like Jason Voorhees, which makes a lot of the stuff in the movie seem very weird. I mean, there's a few really good kills in it. There's one where a girl is killed with hedge trimmers, and then her boyfriend is subsequently murdered with a belt that's like tightened around a tree. That's kind of interesting. But again, it would probably take superhuman strength to do that, and the belt would probably snap before you crush the guy's skull. So it's kind of a weird one. There are some good kills in it. There's a few decapitations and stuff like that, but ultimately a lot of it doesn't add up correctly. And I think this film has a lot of murders. I think it has more than a dozen. I think it has like 13 or 14 in it. And the problem is that some of them are pretty good, but for the majority of it, it's quantity over quality. I can take a Friday the 13th movie with 5 or 6 kills as long as they're good. But this is a lot of it is just all right, the guy gets stabbed and chucked somewhere or this or that. Not really too much originality, which I think ultimately hurts the film and the bait and switch with Jason. So now we move on from number 9, we move to number 8. Number 8 is Friday the 13th, Part 10, Jason X. And I think everybody knows why this is on the top part of this list. It is not a well-made movie. It is a bad movie. It has a weird cameo by David Cronenberg for some reason. Basically, it sees Jason go into the far future and then go into space, and they basically treat Jason like the alien from Alien, where he's running around this. He gets thawed out on this like space vessel that's run by this professor who's a teacher with a bunch of students, archaeological students, I think, and some military personnel and stuff. And he gets thawed out and then immediately starts killing people. But I have to give it because of the originality. The kill's kind of why I had to take it away from Part 5, because we have a few really good ones. We have the kill with the liquid nitrogen, which is amazing, where the freezes the girl's face with liquid nitrogen and then smashes it on the table. That is a great one. That is an all-time classic. And then the double kill with the sleeping bag is another great one, where he's taking the sleeping bag and brutally murdering the 2 campers that are in the sleeping bags, which again is a great one, even though it's kind of cut a little bit, so it's a bit more tame than maybe what it should have been. But I like that. I don't really like Uber Jason, the healed up metal mask wearing Jason, Ultimate Jason or whatever you want to call him. I don't really like the aesthetic of it that much. He looks kind of like a pseudo Terminator, and he basically acts like a pseudo Terminator. But again, I don't really care that much for that. And the setting is kind of crappy. The acting is not very good, although that can go with a lot of these movies too. But Jason X has problems. It does have problems, but the originality of the kills does help the film. And the change in setting is very interesting, because this is obviously the one where they just ran out of ideas and they said, fuck it, let's just put them in space. So that's number 8. Number 7, Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. And this is another one that is a blatant bait and switch, because obviously they could not get the money to actually film a majority of the scenes in Manhattan, because this actually apparently had a lot of scenes that were at Manhattan landmarks, like the Statue of Liberty and the Twin Towers at the time, and the Empire State Building. The only shot that they really get is the shot of Times Square, where Jason's standing there and they do the rotation shot, and that is the shot that they proposed in the trailers. But in reality, it's really more like Jason takes a ferry, because really the whole plot of the movie is supposed to be these kids that are on this ferry, and one of these girls has a connection with Jason, because she like saw him in Camp Crystal Lake when she was a kid, like under the water, like a child version of him. There's this really weird thing in this movie where they kind of float between child Jason and real life Jason, where like the child version of him is supposed to be like the representation of what he really is, and he keeps getting like more and more mutated over the film until he becomes like the deformed Jason that we know. At the same time, the full-size Jason is running around killing people. And also, in this movie, his teleportation powers are legitimately, like, weird. Like, they're actual teleportation powers, because he is running around. There's a scene where he kills one guy where he throws him through a window, and then a second later, he's down on the street with him, and then he shoves him into a toxic waste container, like a 50-gallon drum filled with green liquid, and drowns him to death. But there's a lot of like really weird stuff in this. The special effects on Jason himself, I don't really like all that much. I think he looked much better in Part 7. I think he actually looked better in Part 9 too. And it is good to note that this is the last of the Friday the 13th films that were done by Paramount. After this, it was sold off to New Line Cinema for Parts 9 and 10. And you can tell that they kind of, again, they ran out of ideas in this film. and they marketed it as something when it really wasn't. And I think that's why I really have to take points off for it, is because it's kind of a bait and switch. Even though there are some entertaining kills in the movie, there's one where a girl gets bashed in with a guitar, and there's one where a chick gets stabbed with a mirror. All the kills are actually very weird. They're kind of like very customized to the people that are actually getting killed. And if you watch the movie, you'll kind of get what I'm talking about. But that's my number 7. Number 6, Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. Now, this one is a legitimately good entry, and most of the ones past this, I don't really have too much of a gripe with. A lot of these, other than maybe my 1 and 2 choices, were a lot of splitting hairs. And Part 7 is actually a really good one, and it's basically Jason Voorhees versus Carrie White. Stephen King's Carrie, because it's this girl with telekinetic powers, and she goes off to Crystal Lake after there's this weird subplot where like her telekinetic powers accidentally killed her father when she was a kid, and now she's in therapy, but the doctor is actually like trying to win like some kind of a scientific prize, and he's like trying to mess with her to like manifest her powers so that he can control her and stuff. And the only thing that I really take points off for this is the fact that a lot of these kills were cut by the MPAA, and there's a few of them. There's more than a few of them where there's a scene where where a guy's killed with a weed whacker with a blade on it, and apparently he was supposed to be like cut in half and stuff, and his guts were supposed to come out, but it just shows like a little bit of blood, and then he just like keels over and dies. There's another one where he was supposed to crush a guy's head, which there's actually footage of it online, the footage before they added some of the other stuff to it afterwards, and it looks amazing, but they cut it down so that you really don't see it. You just see like a little bit of it, and then you just hear like a crunchy noise, and then he's dead on the ground. So, I mean, the MPAA basically gutted this movie, which is unfortunate. But the fight scene at the end between Jason and the Carrie White character is really, really good. She does so many different things to him, and it's so fun to kind of see two almost supernatural beings going at it. It's kind of a precursor to the Freddy versus Jason stuff, where Freddy's a supernatural being, Jason's a supernatural being, and they go at it. Again, it's like watching two superheroes duke it out, and that's what this feels like. It feels like these two superpowered beings are duking it out, and it's really entertaining because she can do all these sorts of things to him, and he really can't even. She can do it from afar. She doesn't have to be anywhere near him. Can stay completely out of machete range and just fuck him up, nonstop until she gets, are mentally fatigued and can't do it anymore. But honestly, good entry. I like the idea. I think this was kind of like, this was like the last really great Paramount entry. Probably the last really great entry in that main line of Friday the 13th films. Also, it is fair to note that this is the first appearance of Kane Hodder in the Jason costume at playing the character, and he has a really great costume in this where you get to see like bones and stuff sticking out of him. Again, after Part 6, he's like buried, or he's underwater in Crystal Lake. He's been chained up and put down there, and he's been sitting down there for a while, so like he started to rot away and stuff like that. So you get to see like a lot of bones and stuff like that are like poking out of his like jumpsuit and stuff. But Kane Hodder just has a presence about him, and that's really what I think why he stuck around for so long with Jason through Part 7 through 10. So that's my number 6. Number 5 is Friday the 13th Part 3, and the reason why I give it this is because this is where we established a lot of stuff for Jason, and I really enjoy this film, even though it is a bit dated. Now, this was originally titled Friday the 13th Part 3 3D, because this was made in 1982, when the 3D craze was full on, and this you had stuff like Jaws 3D and like a bunch of stuff like that, so you had a third entry, so it was Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D, and it has some really good original kills. There's a point where a guy gets cut in half. They do like a callback to the Kevin Bacon kill from the first movie where he puts like a hunting knife through a girl's back. There's some other really good stuff in this too. Again, the kills are relatively good. The problem that I have with it is that there are some very obvious 3D shots in it where they're putting stuff close to the camera, or they're having stuff like fly at the camera, and it's really off-putting if you're not watching it in 3D. Like if you're in 3D, I can understand it. You know, like oh, it's coming towards the screen and stuff. It makes sense. But if you're not watching it in 3D, then it just kind of looks stupid, and a lot of it's out of focus, and it looks kind of dumb. That's why I really take off. That's really mostly the reason why I take off points for this. In addition to the fact that a lot of the characters are really just kind of cookie cutter cannon fodder, and even the final heroine. Of the film really doesn't do, she's not really very compelling. We have we do have a few good kills in this. He does crush a head. He shoots somebody. He shoots a girl in the eye with a spear gun. That's actually pretty cool, even though it is a 3D shot. And stuff like that. And this is also the first film where we establish that he has the hockey mask, because one of the characters in the film actually has a hockey mask that he uses to fuck around with people, and Jason picks it up and uses it. So part 3 is my number 5. Number 4 is Friday the 13th, part 6, Jason Lives. Now this was a soft reboot of the series. I believe, if I remember right, this was released in 1986. And basically what happens in this is that Jason was killed at the end of part 4. They do keep that as canon because obviously in part 5 it was somebody else. And they kind of rewrite it after part 4. You can kind of skip over part 5. It doesn't really fit in too much to the narrative, even though this is technically part 6, quote unquote. And we again have the Tommy character. And again, we never mention anything that happened in part 5, any of that, so it's pretty much erased. So we start off with Tommy, and he's basically going to make sure that Jason is dead, and he wants to burn the corpse, even though Jason has apparently been dead for a number of years at this point, because again, Tommy's an adult as opposed to being a child. So he wants to pour gas on Jason Voorhees and light him on fire, and what happens is a lot like a Universal monster film. He goes nuts and he stabs him with this like metal pole that he rips off of a fence post, and then that pole is hit by lightning, and the lightning reawakens Jason. And this is when we get zombie Jason. In the first 4 films, he's a human. He has above average strength and stuff like that, but he's really just he's just a mutant kind of. He's just kind of he's a deformed person. He looks fucked up. In this, after this point, he's a zombie. He's immortal. You can't kill him. It's very hard to kill him, and there's very specific ways, and it's very weird. But this is when he comes back to life, and then he proceeds to just wreak havoc on this town. And the only real reason why I kind of take points off for this is because I think it goes a little nutty with the slapstick comedy. It feels a lot like a comedy, and apparently this was originally supposed to be kind of almost like a spoof. I wouldn't say like a full-on spoof, but it was supposed to be very tongue-in-cheek comedy, a lot more comedic than it actually turned out to be. But the studio managed to talk the director into toning it down a bit, and still making the film somewhat scary. Also, only Friday the 13th film without tits, so you got to take points off for that no matter what, even though there is a sex scene. It does have some good kills, though. It has one where he decapitates 3 people at once. That's really cool. He has another one where he bends a guy in half. That's pretty awesome, even though the special effects are a little wonky. And he has another one, he crushes another head in this one, which is great. It's always great when Jason crushes heads. But a bunch of stuff like that, and ultimately, I really do like this. They also do like kind of a spoof at the beginning of it of like James Bond, where it shows like, Jason walks into view like through an eye hole in a mask, and he slices, and then you see a bunch of blood spurt out. And it's Friday the 13th, part 6, Jason Lives. Again, I like this entry. I really do like this entry. The only thing I thought was it was a bit too hammy, but again, I'm splitting hairs with this, with most of these ones. Part number 3, Friday the 13th, part 2. Now, part 2 is where the first one where Jason comes in as the killer. He's introduced at the very beginning, where he murders Adrienne King's character from the first film, who survived at the end and decapitated Mrs. Voorhees. He kills her in the first 10 minutes with a screwdriver to the head, and this is really the beginning. This is the beginning of what Friday the 13th would become. Sean Cunningham was not involved in this film. He was against bringing Jason in as the killer because it was supposed to be Jason drowned in the lake, and that was Mrs. Voorhees' whole motivation for killing in the first film. So to bring him in, you would just ruin the motivation. But basically the idea is that, hey, what if Jason survived? What if he somehow survived and he just went and lived in the woods for like 20 years, and then he came out and started killing people? And that's basically the idea. And I think they got a I think they got their idea for his look in this from The Town That Dreaded Sundown, because all he has is a potato sack in this. He doesn't get the hockey mask until part 3. And he, it only has one hole in the mask, so you only see one eye, and he's running around with like a pickaxe and stuff. He's running around with various types of weapons, but it's a really good start to this. He's very human in this. He hasn't gotten to the point where he's pretty much superhuman. He gets kicked in the balls a few times and gets knocked down and punched and stuff like that. He's able to wrestle with people on kind of even terms instead of just overpowering them. So it's a lot. At the start of things, he was a lot more grounded. So there's very interesting stuff going on there. As usual, we get down to one girl and all that stuff. Same type of thing there. There's a few very iconic kills in this. Obviously, the biggest one is the two lovers that are impaled on the bed together with the spear. And also the guy in the wheelchair getting the machete to the face. That's a great one. As he goes down the stairs backwards. That's great, even though obviously it's a dummy. But this has some great kills. You had also the great moment where they find the shrine to Jason's mother, where he has the severed head on the middle of the altar. And apparently this was at the beginning of part. I think it was at the end of part 2, because they used the end of part 2 at the beginning of part 3. And at the end of part 2, Jason's mother's head was actually supposed to open its eyes when they zoomed in on it at the very end. And it never happened. Instead, they went with a different type of opening. But it was interesting to actually kind of see that. It proves that we start off with Jason where he doesn't talk. He basically just grunts a little bit here and there, but he's still very menacing. So now we move on to my number 2, and these ones were a bit more clear cut. My number 2 is Friday the 13th, Part 4, The Final Chapter, and I think this one is a really good one because it has the best written characters that get killed off. You have a lot of fairly good actors in this movie. You have Lawrence Monisset. And Crispin Glover. Really, those are the two big ones. But the characters are actually written very well. We get to kind of see a good teenage party. You kind of feel sorry here and there for some of the kids, or you want to see certain things work out and stuff like that. It's very weird to see a slasher film where you actually have character development among the characters that are going to be violently murdered. And on top of that, now you have Jason. And this is also the introduction of the Tommy Jarvis character, who is played by Corey Feldman, who was still a child actor. This movie was made in 1984. They took 2 years off after part 3 because they wanted to make a really good follow-up to that after Jason had supposedly died from the axe to the head in the barn. So, and again, we have a really good opening to this. He kills a nurse and a doctor when they bring him into the morgue in the hospital, and then he proceeds to just do his normal Jason Voorhees thing where he goes after all these teenagers. We have a tie-in to part 2 where the brother of the girl who was impaled with the spear is looking for her, or not looking for her, but going and trying to find Jason because he wants to kill him to avenge his sister. He dies, which is ironic. But there's a lot of really great scenes in this movie, and Ted White as Jason Voorhees in this movie is probably the most menacing outside of Kane Hodder. And it's a shame that he didn't come back for multiple films. But there's a lot of really good stuff in here. Again, the kills are great. This kill with a corkscrew that's amazing. A corkscrew, and then the follow-up is with a meat cleaver to the face, which again, great kill. And then Jason's own death at the end of the film is amazing, where Corey Feldman just does a great job. He shaves his head and tries to pretend that he's like a child version of Jason. Jason gets so confused, and then he takes the machete and wham, right in the head. This was an early film by Joe Zito, who went on to do a lot of action movies following this. He had done The Prowler before this, which I did a movie spotlight on, actually. But part 4 is possibly I personally think is the best Jason entry in the series. Obviously there's 9 Jason entries and one isn't, and that is the last one, which is my number one, and that is the original Friday the 13th film. And the reason I have this is because it establishes a good slasher tone, and we've taken, this was 1980. And this was really the first. The film was made in 1979. I think they specify that, even though it was released in 1980. This was right on the heels of Halloween. This was greenlit right afterwards, and Sean Cunningham really didn't want to do this movie. He was the director of it. And you see that there were actually a decent amount of good actors. Again, Adrienne King comes in as the main heroine. This is I believe, the first film role for Kevin Bacon, if I remember correctly, who has the most classic kill in Friday the 13th history, with the arrow going through the neck from underneath the bed. That is an amazing kill. And this film actually has some emotional standpoint. You don't really know what's happening until the very end of the film. You don't know why people are dying or being murdered. They have a great opening where they show these 2 camp counselors. They get brutally murdered. You have no idea what's going on. The camera views are coming from the killer, which was a big thing. They did that in Halloween a little bit at the beginning, but they didn't do it a whole lot after that. There were a few little scenes here and there, but that initial POV shot in Halloween was really the most of the extent of it. In this, you constantly see stuff from the killer's perspective, and it makes it so much stranger because you know what happens. You know that these people die. You just don't know who's doing it. And then by the end of the movie, then you finally know, Mrs. Voorhees has been doing it the whole time, and you understand, why she's doing it. And Betsy Palmer does a great job at playing this, this grieving mother who's turned psychotic and started killing people, and you understand exactly why. The only thing that I do take points off for it a little bit is the very end is kind of drawn out, and then Adrienne King finally finishes off where she decapitates Mrs. Voorhees, and this starts the whole train of events going forward. And again, I love this movie, and also the ending. The ending to this movie makes people jump out of their goddamn seats if they've never seen it before, where Jason comes out of the water and drags her under into the dream sequence. It's fucking amazing. I love this movie. This is probably one of my favorite slasher movies of all time, and it has some really good kills in it. Like I said before, obviously Mrs. Voorhees at the end is one of the best kills with the decapitation, the full decapitation. And again, the special effects were done by Tom Savini, who did the special effects for, I believe, the first 4 films of the series. And it's great. He does the makeup effects for the young Jason, because they do have him, in addition to a few other scenes, plus the ending. But it's a great, 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 great movie. And that is my entire list of Friday the 13th films from 10 to 1. If you're a fan of Friday the 13th, tell me what your favorite entry is and why in the comments below. Again, I like to know what you're thinking. Remember to hit the like button, hit the bell for notifications, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?